Today we are here with Juliane Taylor Shore, also known as Jules, because I'm so excited that she has this book coming out, Setting Boundaries That Stick. Woo! I'm beyond excited to be talking to you about this, Jules. And what I love so much about your work is that it brings in the neuroscience. It explains why we do what we do so that there's not a heaping pile of shame on top of like, oh my God, how did I react that way? Or, oh, of course, I'm doing this thing where I'm leaning into trying to figure out what my mother or this other person needs or wants, because that's was so smart and adaptive at one point in my life and no longer is serving. So like it's just that extra of course-ness I love that you bring to this work.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I'm hoping that we can take the blame out and the shame out and the contempt out.
The contempt, that's such an
Yeah,
important word, the contempt out.
yeah.
And the internal wrestling for some of us, depending on our personal histories, there's that feeling of having to choose somebody else or yourself.
Yes.
And that was true for some of us when we were younger.
Oh,
But as
very true.
adults, no
Like you were
longer.
not, yeah, but can we even slow down and just name that?
Yeah.
You were not nutty. You saw that accurately. That when you were a little one, you grew up in a world where you either had to choose them or you. That actually is real for lots of people. And I just want to name, if that's you, I see you and I believe you, and you can trust your own inner experience about the truth of what you experienced. And I think that a lot of times we don't slow down enough to acknowledge that, you know?
Thank you for slowing that down, Jules, because wow, it's interesting. I said the words, but you slowing it down really reverberated in my whole system.
Right. And if that's how you grew up, notice this. If you set boundaries, and I'm putting that in quotes because I mean so many different things when I say that, but let's say I go out there, I'm gonna be brave and speak my truth. What's happening is you're actually going against everything your implicit memory system learned about what safety is and what
And
staying in relationship is.
yes,
Yuck.
yuck
So,
indeed.
so to learn to set boundaries is not so simple. For folks who have a more complex history with boundaries, it's not so simple as, well, just give me a map of what to say. I just need an example of what to say. And those are great.
They are great.
There are wonderful examples of what to say. But for a lot of us, having just that is actually not enough because we're fighting against everything we learned about how to survive in this planet.
Oh, thank you for naming that, Jules, for all of us. And I wonder if we take a tiny little tangent in explaining what implicit memory is
Yeah,
before
yeah.
we then dive into your book.
Absolutely. My book talks all about implicit memory.
Oh, perfect.
So
So then
this is
just
a
a one
big part of
sentence.
it.
Yeah.
Memory system is a lot more complicated than just I remember where I was on my last birthday, or I remember who was the first president of the United States. Those are more factual, explicit, autobiographical, anchored in time in this explicit way. So there's explicit memory and there's implicit memory. Implicit memory is, like you knowing how to walk up a staircase is part of your implicit memory system. You knowing that if I hold up this pen and I let it go, that it will fall, and you didn't have to think, on this planet, gravity is real, in order to know what was going to happen to the pen. That's part of your implicit memory system. So is all of your subconscious, very early learned expectations about how relationships work, who you are, how to move through the world, what works and what doesn't, what's food and what's not food. All of that is part of your implicit memory system. It happens every moment of every day. You add to it every moment of every day. And I tell people, well, your brain is wearing history colored glasses, whether you like it or not.
I love that.
That's just how it is. So your brain is wired to lean into your implicit memory system, and it doesn't feel like memory when it's active at all. It feels like just truth about how the world is.
Thank you for that. And
Mhm.
that is such a beautiful demonstration for everyone of why I love getting to learn from you and talk to you, and why this boundaries book, there are many, and actually it's not one or the other, but
Right. I
what
love
I'm
them.
imagining
It's
is
great.
really going to set this book apart from any other book that anyone's ever read, is the way you describe the way you take the neuroscience and you bring it into easy to digest everyday words,
Hmm.
help us really know the of course-ness of what we're doing, and
Hmm.
then gives us, and this is what you can do about it. Because the other thing that you just said was, we're seeing it and we don't realize it's memory, and then what you teach, and I imagine is in this book, is
Hmm.
and here's what you can do about that,
And
and
here's what you can
here's
do
how you
about
can
that.
retrain your brain, because it, since you learned it in the first
Exactly.
place, even though you don't see that you learned it, you can unlearn it and rewire with intention. Oh,
That's exactly right. Because when I think about my work, I'm really a how person.
yes.
So I love the what, I love the why, but my job is really all about, yeah, yeah, that's a great idea. I want that. How do I do that? How do I work with the brain that I have instead of against the brain that I have? So everything that is my teaching all over is all about how. How do we get there?
And then the second part of the title of your book, that's sick, which I'm excited to dive in. I wonder though, as we're diving into the book,
Uh-huh.
um I have a couple of intentions actually. One is to
Yeah.
hear about the book for everyone who's listening, to hear about the book, so you have a sample of what's to come, and if you are like, oh, I want, tell me more, you can order the book everywhere books are sold.
Yeah.
The other is I have some specific questions, because while we can introduce folks to the book and then they can get a sense. And thank you so much for speaking directly to our remothering community. I have a couple of
Yeah.
questions and ideas of how some of the boundary challenges that folks in our community sometimes come up
I
against.
love this. Yeah, because I think actually, can I tell you something that was really hard for me about writing the book? I
Please.
actually had to move through my own boundary work to write the book. I actually had what I would say would be, I'll use a term from the book that I'll describe in a little bit. I had a rigid containing boundary around putting a book out. I was very on the no end. I'm not going to do this.
Oh,
And the
interesting.
reason I was that way for a long time is because whenever I do boundary work, it's actually a large conversation and a co created dance with each
Mm.
individual nervous system that I'm working with. And it felt like to put those ideas in black and white, it would feel more rigid or like set than I mean it to be. I was really worried about that when it came to writing the book, because what I want to communicate to people is you have a unique as a snowflake individual little journey in your own system through boundary work. And so I actually can't tell you exactly how to say the thing or exactly how to treat yourself. What I can tell you is how to have a slightly different relationship
Mm.
with how minds function, with how your mind functions, with finding compassion for yourself, with what compassion does with the brain. I'm all about how do I help you know how to work within your system to find your very unique path through. So in writing the book, I got to a space where it's like, I don't know if it's a good idea. I think I was
It's a
right.
very
Maybe I
good
should
idea.
not be doing this. Right. I got to this space like probably halfway through writing it where I was like, I think I should quit. I think I was right all along and I should not put this out. Notice I've already put it out. So clearly we know how the story ends. But I had to do a ton of my own compassion work and my own curiosity around what is hard about this. And I think for me, what was really hard, and I don't think I ever just, didn't really solve the problem. I just said, well, this is just part of the problem and I'll dance with this problem, but there may not be a solution to it. Is that I don't want the book only to be like, just do these things. I actually want it to be a conversation between us and between, and invite conversation between you and your own heart.
I love that. And invite
So that,
conversation between you and your own heart.
yeah, that's what the book is for. And the roadmaps are more about how do we face this hard reality that
Mm.
you're having your own experience in your mind, and the person you're close to and want to be close to or have to deal with, maybe even if you don't want to deal with, is actually having a completely different experience of this moment of reality. How do we address that? Because that is challenging.
That
How
is,
do we, right? How do you hold this reality? You have a ton of influence in this world, some of us more than others, depending on your social location and experiences in life. But you have ability to influence the world, and you absolutely cannot control it. How do you hold both of those at the same time and not lose it, you know? So how do you speak up for yourself about what is okay for you and what's not okay for you, and what you're going to do to protect yourself when the not okay thing happens? How do you do that in a way that's as kind as you want to be, that's as centered as you want to be, that's in your own integrity, and that you can stick to even when inevitably pushback comes, because it will. I'm playing with all of those ideas. And so I just said, well, I'm going to put this out there and hope that it invites this conversation between you and you, that it invites deeper conversations between you and the world,
mm,
knowing that writing is a bit of an imperfect form of doing that, and
mm.
just saying yes to the imperfection of that was a big part of the journey of writing the book for me.
Well, I, for one, am so glad that you, that in
That
the
I
conversation
loosened
between
up
you and
that
you,
container.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
This is through my own history colored glasses, which
Mhm.
is, I have such a tendency, I've been working with it over the many years, so less now than I once did, but still present, to over explain to try and be understood because of my own personal history of misattunement. And I wonder if writing a book, if you have your own explainer in there that wants to
Oh,
be understood.
yes. Oh, yes. And it was so challenging because my sweet publisher decided to really boundary the book. Speaking of boundaries, because I had to keep to 50,700 words. So I wrote 90,000 words because I wanted to make sure I exquisitely described the thing so that you would get exactly what I was saying as if that were a possibility. That is not actually a possibility because you can't hear any of the words coming through me without adding your own context into it. And so it was a real challenge. I struggle with a similar thing. It's a real challenge for me to use less words, but thank God for my editors because they helped me. It's actually a very readable short book. It's only got 9 chapters in it.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah, but I
I,
have the same problem. Yeah.
I can't emphasize enough to everyone that the reason that I invited Jules to talk to our community is because her boundaries teachings are incredible. And so I'm just excited about, I'm very excited about having this in physical form.
Yeah. You know, I was speaking to somebody who's worked with me for a long time. This one of my senior staff folks, so, you know, she's been training with me for 10 years at least. But she said, you know what I love is it's like all the stuff I've been hearing from you is actually written down in a place I can now reference,
Yes.
which is what I was hoping for. So yay,
Yes.
we have accomplished this.
So you named two things just now that I wanted to
Mhm,
really underline, and then
mhm,
I'll ask my next question, which
mhm,
was the conversation between you and you. And I love
mhm,
that, the conversation between you and you. And I imagine we'll dive into that a little bit more when you're talking
mhm,
about in your book, and
mhm,
then in your own integrity.
mhm,
When you said in your own integrity, I wonder if the path in is for me to start with a question, or if the path in is for you to give us an overview of the
mhm.
book, because, and maybe I'll share the question now, you can give the overview knowing where I'm going, which is,
Yeah.
I've heard, I want to say a half a dozen times in the recent time, folks in our remothering community that are wrestling because their parent, their mother specifically, but this could be any parent, has an expectation related to the parent's health. And so how in integrity, and I think it's probably easiest to use my own example, but know that it applies to others in different scenarios, which is when my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer a couple of years ago. And the end of the story is she's alive and well. And on the other side, it was one of those places of what's an integrity for me, because and there was an expectation. And so I knew that no matter what I did wasn't going to be the whole thing for her. And so that in integrity with myself decision of how will I show up in integrity with myself, even if it's disappointing, and all the other implications around it. So that word in integrity with myself really struck my ears with that.
Yeah. Well, I think, so I think the idea of giving an overview of how I see boundary work
Yes.
would be helpful. And then we can talk in more detail about that. And here's how it's going to help you with staying in your personal integrity.
Yes.
Because that is so important. Because my overall hope is to support people in having deeper, more kind connections with themselves and with other people simultaneously. Because I think it's going to make a kinder world. I think if it's more like power with lifting each other up and celebrating each other world. So that's like my big oomph behind putting it out there. My big why is about putting the work out there to possibly make that. So I see boundaries as both external work and internal work. And external boundaries are the ones you usually would hear about. So an external boundary would be something I said out loud or did in action with another person where I responded to a situation in a way that was protecting myself, standing up for me when something not okay happened. This is not about getting people to do what you want, because that's not actually a thing. We don't get to control that.
Not a thing.
I have a big separation in the book between what is a direct request and what is a boundary. A direct request is when I'm asking someone to change a behavior, or when I'm asking them to do something they're not doing, that sort of thing. And the thing about direct requests is they might say no. Ugh. I hold the grief in that.
Yeah. And the vulnerability in that.
And the vulnerability in that.
Even as you say that, the deeper connection in that, because you're not trying to control the other person.
I'm really not trying to control the other person. I'm trying to be really deeply respectful and connected to the other person, even as I ask for something else other than what's happening. Okay, so that's a direct request. A boundary is when something that's happening is not okay. I've probably tried a few direct requests. Those have gone deeply badly, and I've decided that whatever's happening is so not okay. It's not cool for me to hang with the grief about me not getting what I want only. I'll do that, but I'm also going to need to take some steps to protect myself.
I love that separation of the direct request and the boundary.
Yeah. I think a lot of times we say the word boundary and we're meaning that we want somebody to do something different.
Those two things. Yes.
Yeah. And you do want somebody to do something different. I don't want to discount that, but sometimes that won't happen. And when that doesn't happen, do you need to add protection? If so, that's the time for boundary work. So that external boundary, I have 6 steps that you go through, and you go through them away from the person that you're going to set the boundary with. That's back end work. So that when you are in the situation, you are prepared. And the 6 steps, I'll give you like a brief overview. If you want all the details, read the book for this. But basically, boundaries are really hard, so you're going to need a really big why. You need a big oomph emotionally if you're going to stick to a boundary, because you're probably going to get pushback, and that can be a difficult moment. 2,
knowing why you're
right, knowing why you're doing the thing. 2, define what action you are going to take and how you're going to communicate that if indeed you are. So like, I'm thinking about, this is an example from the book, someone had practiced going out to a bar situation, right, with girlfriends, and if men approached, how would she deal with that? That wasn't like back and forth with a particular person. This was a practice that she was just going to do with random strangers when they got too close to her physically, right? So that's different than if I'm thinking, I need to set this boundary with my kid or with my husband or with my friend or my brother or something like that. Well, then I'm probably in a very specific scenario. In either case, we want a big oomph, a big why to make it emotionally potent enough that I will do the hard thing. Because brains love doing not the hard thing. Because the hard thing
Brains
sucks.
do love doing that hard
So we
thing.
need to support, your brain is just biologically wired to do that. So we need to support the possibility of your brain having enough emotional oomph, is what I call it, in it, that doing the hard thing is actually more worthwhile than doing the easy thing. So
And
we're just working with the biology.
yes. And I was listening to your podcast from November, and you had an example in there that really struck for me, which was talking to your daughter about bedtime routine and knowing that if she hadn't brushed her teeth in time, that there wasn't gonna be time for talking at the end. And my heart was like, oh my gosh, how would you say no to a beautiful little child? I was like, but mommy, I wanted to tell you something. And what you said was your big why rippled into my body, which was like, I want to teach my daughter that as a woman, she's allowed to say no, and they want to model that. So that's a big why, because
that's a big why.
That's a really big why. Wow.
Yes.
That, yeah. So
I want her to know it's okay to say no. And when she gets pushback from this world, which she will do, that it's okay for her to continue to say no. Even if the pushback looks really sweet.
Yeah.
Which
and
sometimes
even if you
it
want
does.
to and have to hold the grief
Yeah,
of it.
totally. There's still a no. Yes, exactly. So you want a big oomphy why, and then you want to define an action. So what is it I'm actually going to do the protection? And that is such a personal question. I don't know what's right for you in this situation, the context of your life, what your community history is like, what your family's history is like. I think there are different kinds of boundaries depending on where you come from that are more and less appropriate culturally. So it's not for me to say, ooh, here's what a healthy boundary is. Yeah, I don't do anything like that.
That's what you're talking about, the co-creation, and why it was so
right.
challenging to
It's so
decide to put it into pages.
Exactly. So for you, what would protection look like? And do you want to communicate that, and how? And sometimes you do, and sometimes you just want to do the thing, and either way is fine. So that's step 2. And then step 3 is anticipate, guess what might happen in the other person when you do this thing.
Love that.
Step 4, guess what's going to happen emotionally in you when they have the reaction they're going to have. Step 5, create a plan to soothe you when inevitably you have big feelings about their feelings.
And I will say, for my way of speaking, that would be the remothering moment.
Right.
And you've got you.
Love
when you
this.
know you're going to be
You've got you. Yes, your remothering community already has a step 5 in their back pocket that they're all practicing, right? Where they're going to remother themselves in that moment.
Yeah,
I
like,
love
of course.
this.
And back to your, of course it feels
Of
this way,
course.
the neurobiology, and we know why it
Yeah.
feels this way. And
Yeah.
also,
And
I have
also,
now this big why of why it's worth it to
yep,
feel uncomfortable.
totally. And sometimes in step 5, I like to have a little bit of soothing and remind myself of my big why at the same time, so that I can follow through step 6. And that one is keep the boundary. Just keep doing what you said you were going to do in the first place. So that's that external boundary, right? But there are internal boundaries too. So internal boundaries are a psychological boundary. That's the space where I acknowledge that your mind and my mind are different. And because of that, that means that not everything you think is true and is about me is actually true and about me. That's just not the case. Who decides what's true? I have hard news for everybody. You do. I don't. Are you going to get it wrong? Absolutely. You'll fix it later. Like there's no perfection that we're looking for here. Just an acknowledgement that minds are different. How do I be in connection with someone while respecting me and respecting them at the same time, while having compassion for me and compassion for them at the same time. And so we play with the mentalization neural network, which is a fancy word for a part of your brain that guesses what's happening in other people. We play with that network in the book so that you can know a little bit about how that network actually speaks and which parts of the body that network listens to, so that you can embed discernment. Don't take into everything everybody says, because actually a bunch of it is about them. And two, that I listen with acceptance. I used to call it respect, and that's not untrue, but I found out as I was going through my writing process, listening with acceptance is even more rooted in what I mean. I mean that other people's thoughts and feelings are not actually inherently dangerous. They are just them becoming them through time. And I don't need to go in there and change that for me to be okay. It's hard
really
work.
big.
It's hard
And
work.
as you said that, I would love to focus on personal relationships right now, because a lot of things popped for me that I think would be bigger conversation than we have time for.
Yeah.
But I imagine it applies globally, but let's keep it
Right.
to personal
Really personal.
relationships.
Right.
I'm
And I'm
gonna
not.
breathe for a second, because a part
Yeah,
of me is
breathe.
really having a hard time not asking or getting into another conversation. So I'm just gonna
Yeah.
acknowledge there's a lot happening, and so many of us might be thinking different things, but let's just
Yeah.
appreciate that what we can work with right here in this right now moment in this conversation will be the conversations happening between our own two ears, and then how those conversations might happen with people in our own immediate, like the people we're physically having conversations with, physically on the phone or in person. But
Yes, totally. And I really want to separate out a thought and a feeling from speech. Speech is a behavior. Not everything everyone says is actually okay. I actually have a huge problem with dehumanizing language, for example. Calling people monsters is never okay. It leads to bad things, right? I'm not talking about what people say. I'm talking about what they feel and think. Because sometimes what people say is harmful. Words matter. I'm not one of those. I remember I grew up in a home that was very, well, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. I was like, actually, they did, like a lot. My personal experience is that words hurt a ton. And I want to be thoughtful about how I show up in that way. Right. And I wish that other people sometimes were more thoughtful than they are about how they show up in that way. But let's break it down to an interpersonal interaction.
Love that.
Right?
Thank you. I love that too, that thoughts and feeling, bringing it down to almost like the molecules of building blocks.
All these different experiences, right? So let's say I'm having an interpersonal difficult moment with my husband. And he is thinking about a moment we went through, and his story about that moment is really different than my story. And what a lot of us do is we jump in there and we try to get the other person to agree with our side. And then he feels invaded by me because he is being invaded by me. Or the fun other version where I totally shut down and then judge him for being wrong, but quietly in my mind. How much acceptance do I actually have in that moment for this being a different human than me who is having an experience that is coherent for him? And so when I think about my own integrity, one of the things I really value is kindness towards others. That's one of my big words. Kindness and courage are my two big words. So is it actually kind for me to be in judgment of him silently while not telling him anything that I'm thinking? Does that fall under my rubric of kindness? Nope. That would bring me out of my integrity. So some of this is about keeping me in the way I want to be with someone.
Mm.
So I'm not saying, by the way, that I'm going to lose me either and then go agree with his story.
What I'm hearing you
Right.
say is two things. One is you gave us examples of how we as humans show up paradoxically incongruent in different moments. And I
Yes.
really love that you underline that. Like we can show up boundary impaired in many different ways, even with the people
Yes.
we most love in this world.
Yes.
One, and then two, which is, oh, I lost my two, so we'll just keep, which was
Yeah. That's totally okay.
ah.
Yeah, because think about how differently the conversation goes. Let's say we were in a thing where I was bringing up to him that it felt harsh or loud or like he was yelling during this interaction, like that it just showed up really hard for me. And he goes, I wasn't yelling, which is not an atypical response, right? Now, if I have my psychological boundary up, I can see his mind is different than mine. Okay, discernment. He was yelling. True or not true? He wasn't yelling, is his story. True or not true? About me, not about me. If it's both true and about me, I'm going to let it in. If it's not true and it's not about me, I'm going to keep it over there and notice that that is true for him, but not true for me. Right? And listening with acceptance. Oh, I'm not going to try to change how he's feeling and thinking, right? That I don't need to shift that. So, okay, for whatever reason, he thinks he wasn't yelling. Okay. If I don't have my psychological boundary up, here's what's going to happen next. Yes, you were. You were being so harsh. No, that's not what was happening. Right? And we're off to the races. If I have my boundary up, I might say, I totally hear you. It did not feel like yelling. Is it all right with you if I share what it was like for me? I'll use a different word if that helps.
That was my number two, is honoring, keeping both people in the equation, you and your beloved in the equation, and not losing yourself in the equation. And if we have a personal history where it really was us or the other, having both in the conversation and the equation is new for some of us.
Yeah, and it takes lots of practice. And I just want to say, I've been working on my own psychological boundary image, which is one of the practices in the book, for like 7 years now. So I'm better at it than I was and still imperfect.
Thank you for naming that. And really, that was something else that you mentioned in the November podcast before the book came out, I loved, which was talking about like learning the instrument, or I'll add, or like learning a sport. It's not like we're going to read this book and then be
No.
Mozart.
No, in fact, this book is filled with practices, and my husband was reading it, which he's not actually that much of a reader. So I was like, "Whoa, you read my book? Oh, honey, that's awesome." He's like, "Actually, yeah, but I'm not sure. How do I do all the practices at once?" I was like, I just need to be clear with people. You do not have to do that. You could dip your toe into this and go, that is a practice I really want to focus on, and spend a whole month or two just really being with that. And then dip your toe back into the book and add a different practice later on once you've got a handle on it. It's built that way so that you are in and out of it, starting to apply it to your life and really growing into this space, right? Where you can be in this different kind of relationship. And another big one, I haven't talked that there's actually 4 different types of boundaries, but containing boundary work is huge when it comes to integrity. I'm holding in mind you wanted me to talk about integrity. So containing boundary work is the pause between what you feel and what you do. So a lot of times when we're in that more reactivity space, we'll feel and do.
Yes.
And then later I look at what I did, like moment of yelling with my kid or something, where I'm just like, oh man, I totally lost it. That's not how I want to show up in the world. Or I'm thinking about, here's some containing boundary work I did recently with my own kiddo. She really, really, really wanted a dog for her 10th birthday. There was a dog in the neighborhood that needed adoption, and we have a dog, and we brought this pup over, and my dog growled at this dog the entire time. And that is super weird because my dog does not growl at dogs. And even after that visit, she was like, I just want Eddie. The only thing I want for my 10th birthday is Eddie. And I was sitting there going, I don't think this is a good plan for our family. This sweet dog does need a home, but this one's not his home. And I was really clear that this was not going to be a thing we could say yes to. But I was avoiding talking to her about it because I didn't want to face the disappointment. But then I kept thinking, like, wait, Jules, you don't want to get to birthday morning and have Eddie not be here and deal with that, right? And so I used my containing boundary practice. So the containing boundary practice is made up of a gesture of compassion and then 2 keywords. And the book walks you through like how to find them and stuff. But my keywords are courage and kindness. And so I go like this and I think about talking to my kiddo about it. And I go, courage, kindness. What could you do that would meet both of those? And the conclusion was like that for me. Like, oh no, talking about it to her early is both more courageous and more kind.
And bringing it back to the example from folks in our community, what I'm hearing you say, and a little confirmation bias for me, but is what's in integrity isn't the don't be selfish, do the right thing.
No.
Conditioning. It's, did I pause, connect with my heart, and then make a decision from a centered place that was in integrity?
Yes.
And
who says what's in integrity? You do.
And what I really love is the slowing down of, it's not either don't be selfish or like again, that like the framing of the question itself almost makes the answer obvious if we're going through our old programming. And you're literally describing it with a completely different framework to help us make a decision, which is really important.
Yeah, exactly. I want people to find a fast way that in the moment of a hard moment, you could, I'm thinking of a person I worked with recently who had a little ring and she would spin it. When she was feeling particularly kind, she would spin it towards herself, towards her kids, towards her partner. She would spin this. And we came up with 2 words. We co-created this space where she could discover, oh, these 2 words, which was for her respect and love. And so she would do this and say respect and love. And then how she said what she would said would come out differently. You know, what kind of decisions she would make would come out, whether or not she paused longer would be available to her. But it was an in the moment thing you can do. And for me, the 2 keywords are, hey, who do you want to be for you in this world? And how do you want to show up in relationship in this world? So one is a personal integrity word, the other is a relational intention word. You put them together with a kind gesture and whoop, you have a containing boundary practice where you can put a pause between what you feel and what you do, even when you're highly reactive in your life. And it'll help you slow down and stop because you're keying all this into the neural network right here that soothes your lower brain. So we're always weaving in the neurobiology to say, hey, your brain works like this. Because of that, you could do this way, and it wouldn't be perfect, and it wouldn't even always be easy, but it would work with practice.
That's beautiful. And to tie it back again into the neuroscience, that when you're talking about the compassion, not all of us in our community, but for some of us, that word self-compassion in and of itself can be hard because of that don't be selfish, don't be self anything.
Totally.
But what I love about what I've learned from you is when we can lean into that network, what we're doing is sending soothing neurochemicals so that we can show up for the
Mm-hmm.
people we love most in this world in a place of centeredness and of who
Yes.
we want to be instead of reaction.
Yes, exactly. So when we're in judgment or harshness or will or automatic reactivity, what's happening is we're actually sending excitatory neurochemicals to the lower part of our brain. And so it'll basically, I call it setting your brain on fire. You want to set your brain on fire? Judge yourself. And by the way, when you out there judge yourself after hearing that, I totally get it. Me
Me
too.
too.
Me too. You're not alone. And then we're gonna try not judging ourselves for judging ourselves. And then when we do that too, we're gonna try not judging ourselves for not judging ourselves for judging
And
ourselves.
then
Do
we
you know
can
what I
lean into the
mean?
remothering moment and be like, of course you did
Of
that. And
course you
of course
did
you did that
that.
after that. And
And
now here I got you.
there's nothing wrong with you for doing the thing you were taught to do, sweetie. There's nothing wrong with you.
Oh, well, while I
Yeah.
have my hand here on my heart, I think it's
Yeah.
going to need to stay there because we are going to be starting to wrap up. But I want to, well, first of all, it doesn't have to be over because, folks, this is going to have all of the things we just talked about and
And so much more.
so much more.
So much more.
If you want to learn from Jules' book and podcasts and so many.
Yeah, and I have a workshop coming up. It's in person and it's small groups. Only 10 people are allowed.
Oh, very nice. And so how will people
So
stay in touch with you about finding out when the workshop is?
yeah, JulianeTaylorShore.com is the name of my website. And if you just go there, you will see on one of those little drop downs workshops for everyone. Just click there and you'll find the boundaries workshop. And I've got a couple of spots still left open, so feel free to
Very cool.
come on board. And I have one that's live in person and one that's live on Zoom coming up in the spring. Yeah.
Coming up in the spring. I want to share also, because some of the folks in our community are therapists. And so if you're listening to this book is for everybody,
Yes.
therapists and non-therapists alike. But you also have some tools and things for specifically for therapists. And I want to just name that. You teach neurobiology classes at Therapy Wisdom. And then you have I was looking at your website before we came, you have a practice group, a stairs, something. Do you want to share
Yes.
that with anybody who
That is coming. If you're trained like many clinicians are in 5 to 30 different models. And so how do we weave those together in a way that's really client-centered and brain-centered at the same time? And I'm creating a larger method for doing that people can learn, and it's going to be a bigger training, and it's also going to come out through Therapy Wisdom, but not until I think May of 2024 is level 1.
Did I ask
So
too quick? Did I ask too soon? Should I
no, it's totally fine. I love it. It's totally, if you want to leave it in, feel free. So yes, so that is the stair method is coming, and there'll be practice groups as part of that, and there's lots coming down the pike for that, so keep an eye out for it if you're looking for organizing your world clinically.
I love that. Speaking of organizing clinically, there's a question that I want to weave in.
Do it.
What can you explain to us when you're just out in the world, you hear people talking now about nervous systems and you hear people talking about embodied somatic practices. Is there a short way to explain the difference or the sameness of that?
I can absolutely explain that. Centuries ago, there was an error where we started talking about brain and body as if they were separate. And that's not actually true. Mind-body connection isn't even really exactly what we mean, because mind is body and body is mind. So the nervous system stretches out through your entire body, and the nervous system is not separate from your brain. It's actually an integral part of, and your brain is your body's captive audience, 4 times a second, watching for cues from that nervous system about what's happening in every organ and all over your skin and what's happening around you in space. So here's what I think, is I think embodied somatic practices are us holding the mind in its more complete form, because thoughts are part of your mind and emotions are part of, that's one of the ways. I think of here's how I would say it. the brain talks to you in a lot of different languages. Vibrations and energies and sensations and movements and memory fragments and sensory bits and emotions and thought. And all of that is the brain's language and the body's language. And what's hard now is we're now dealing with centuries after, oops, we accidentally thought they were different. They're not. We should just be saying, well, brain body.
So we're just using different language to try and get at speaking to the complexity of who we are as a human.
And all that your nervous system is really processing any moment.
I think that's a longer conversation, but that's a perfect short answer for that.
I'll give you the short version.
I appreciate that. And we'll hopefully have another chance to have another conversation.
I would love that, Simona, seriously, anytime you want.
I really appreciate you tailoring a custom for our remothering community so that we could get our heads around what you have. I'm so excited that it's here. Okay.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone listening. Thank you for giving me time to be with you in this moment. Thank you for giving you time to be with you in this moment. Yes, awesome, and tons of gratitude.
Well, Jules, thank you so much. It was really a treat to see you. I am going to stop the recording and then I'll say goodbye to you in person.
All right.
But bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye for now.